5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
High and low, it's how I roll. A shooting star in a film noir. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground. I am no average Joe. Be with me and you will see more than you ever wanted to.
Hey. Hello, folks. How are you tonight? Hello, Charlotte J. Hanger One, nice to see you. Mr. T in Tennessee, awesome. Nice you could make it. John Ayers, thank you. Craig Roach, researcher extraordinaire. Uncle Bones. Who else we got here tonight? That may be it. Oh, Sharon, nice to see you. Eric Sell, thank you, buddy, for showing up. Appreciate you. And I appreciate all you guys tuning in to my show. I look forward to it every week. Jennifer Arnold, thank you very much. As always, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. If I'm saying something you like during the show, like it, hit notifications, share, whatever you want to do to spread the word. I see Bristol is in the audience as well. Hello. Tonight, we're hopefully going to wrap up the segments on bias, and we're going to be taking a look at some variety of definitions, and hopefully spend the most of our time on the BFRO classification system. If you're not familiar with it, it's a good guide. Doesn't get us to reality, as Charlotte J and I were talking about a few minutes ago, but it provides us a guideline or a yardstick that we can use to try and be as objective as possible. To start the show, I'm going to revisit a story many of you regular followers have heard multiple times, and I'm going to truncate it because it can be a long story, and I want to include one other story in the presentation tonight. So the story I'm going to refocus this on for this show, that this encounter, Class B encounter, I would call it, contains so many important concepts that that's why I keep coming back to it. But this is the one where I was in a group of 4, Mark Ogilvy, Dan Kegley, who I call Mr. Braveheart in my book, and myself and George Wrigley. And we were hiking up and hiking back down towards on a fire road above a midway camp where there were 4 people observing, and there were 2 other groups out. And as we were about 100 yards from the steep path where you would take that steep path back down to the cabin, we had a tree explode, and it sounded like it was exploding right on top of us. It was either a tree break or a tree fall. It sounded more like a complete tree fall. And 3 of us scattered like cockroaches when you turn on the lights. But one of us, Dan Kegley, and this is why I call him Braveheart, he just kind of pivoted on his heels and reached for his K-bar facing upslope and was ready to take on whatever was coming. After the tree fell, it sounded like a landslide was coming down on top of us. And I mean, I was looking for the rocks and the trees to come down, but lo and behold, nothing hit the forest road we were on. And as we were trying to debunk it, figure out what was going on, I looked uphill with my red light and I saw some dust settling. And just before I saw the dust settling, I smelled that strong smell of loam. We tried to debunk it. We couldn't find any other sign. We started heading down that last 100 yards till we got to the steep slope down to the cabin, and they radioed up to us from the cabin. Are you guys on the steep slope coming down, or are you on the forest road? Well, we're on the forest road. So we got to the steep slope, started heading down it, maybe 20, 30 yards, and they radioed us again. Are you guys on the steep slope, or are you in the forest road coming down? And at that point, we were kind of agitated that they kept bothering us. And we said, why are you asking? Well, when you were up on the forest road, we saw some red lights lagging behind you guys. And now those red lights seem to be following you down the steep slope. So we all pivoted and looked up, and of course we couldn't see anything. Got down to the cabin to rest before we went down the rest of the mountain back to our base camp. And as we're sitting there, we saw a red light, kind of just what looked like a red light, just kind of pop out behind a tree and pop back in. Pop out the other side, pop back in. And a couple people pointed it out. At this point, there were 16 of us at the midway camp, and everybody saw it. And for about 20 to 30 minutes, not just one red light or one eye glow, if you will, if it was a Bigfoot, but throughout the whole path, there were multiple peepers going on, peeping out from behind a tree, peeping back in, peeping out, peeping back in. And we were all just amazed at this. And we stayed watching it until that activity stopped. Next morning, we had aspirations of heading back up to look for a sign. We had marked the spot where this happened with 2 sticks making an X standing vertically in the ground. We shoved the sticks down in the ground. But us being of the old, not old men, but I was the oldest, but we were pretty beat up. We were pretty tired. It was a pretty good hike up and back. And a young buck by the name of, he's a block on his name. I'm sorry, he deserves a lot of credit, and I keep blocking on his name every time I tell this story. He, fresh out of the army, he hikes up to the spot. We told him where to look for the X's, and couldn't find. He walked up there, and lo and behold, found a footprint. He ran back down to base camp, got one of the guys who was most had the greatest facility with casting, and they made a cast. And while they were letting the cast set up, they were looking around, found another partial print that they couldn't cast on the forest road. And then they looked to the downside edge of the forest road, and there was a partial print right on the side of the forest road. And they looked up next to the tree where the print was, and there was a bark tear about 15 foot up on the tree, and it was a fresh bark tear. And when they looked out over the edge, about 8 foot down, it plateaued off, and they counted 35 to 40 juvenile footprints down there. They didn't want to take the risk and try to go down and cast them. And so I'm going to revisit this story when we talk about causality versus correlation versus coincidence. Eric, my good friend, asked a pretty good question. Do you have any explanation for the red eyes? I think either last show or the show before it, when we talked about after image, if you want to be the ultimate skeptic, you might just write that off to after images. We're walking around with red lights. We look up, you're going to get the after image of the red lights. But this was happening in so many locations on that steep path where we just came down that really didn't seem like a plausible explanation. Some people say their eyes will reflect the light that is put on them. So we're putting red light on them, they're going to reflect red light back. You put white light back on them, they're going to reflect white light back. I don't know that we're going to have an actual explanation before we really get, and I'm not promoting kill phenomena or kill philosophy, but until we can study their visual system well, I think before we can really answer that. One of the growing trends, and I think it's an important trend to discuss in the field, however, is that there's a difference between eye shine and eye glow. Eye shine looking more like a reflection, seeing red eyes, where a lot of people report eye glow. And in eye glow, it's almost as if their eyes are generating their own light and projecting that light from their eyes onto the ground or wherever they're looking. And so it's hard to have a scientific explanation for that beyond saying that people consistently report the same two kinds of experiences. An eye glow, which seems more, an eye shine that seems more reflective, and an eye glow that looks like they're almost generating their own red light from their eyes. I wish I had a better answer for you, Eric, but that's as much as we can understand at this point. So thank you for that question. So let's pick up with the slides. We're going to cover a few more definitions that I haven't discussed. Confabulation. When there's a blank in your memory system, be it from a neurologic condition like a stroke or a brain injury or many of the dementing diseases, if it eats away the right cells in either in your visual cortex or in the visual nerves, going back to your cortex. I'm sorry, I'm stuck on eye shine. The trauma can in neurologic conditions, there's damage to the memory centers of the brain. I'm sorry, and in encounters, not necessarily even traumatic encounters, but it's more common in traumatic encounters. People will have memory blocks or empty memory spaces where they remember up to a certain point, and then they have no memory until hours or days later. And the important thing to understand about the concept of confabulation is whether it's due to a neurologic condition or a traumatic condition or just over arousal from any kind of experience, whether it's traumatic or not, it can be associated with memory blocks or memory gaps, if you will, loss of memory. And that creates, if you recall, we discussed something called cognitive dissonance. Our brain's got to kind of reconcile, why is it that we can't remember that? And that creates kind of an imbalance in our memory system. And again, in both neurologic and traumatic or almost traumatic conditions where this memory gap exists, it's not uncommon for the brain to fill in that memory gap for us. This is one of the reasons why hypnotic induced testimony is not allowed in courts. Number one, the hypnotherapist or hypnotists themselves can make suggestions that can fill in those memory blanks. But even if you're the best hypnotherapist in the world and you don't do any suggesting that would cause one to fill in that memory gap, the brain will sometimes take care of itself under hypnosis. Doesn't need hypnosis to do it, but it can do it under hypnosis and create memories that may or may not be accurate. They may or may not be accurate memories. And that's called confabulation. Talked about it in neurologic. In effect, the brain makes something up, information, memories, images, sounds, to reduce that dissonance, the discomfort due to inconsistency in recollections or behaviors associated with the blank spots in consciousness. Now we could spend a whole show on this next one, and I'm going to treat it kind of lightly here, but it very well in the future may pop up as an entire show. Because the understanding of the difference between coincidence, correlation, and causality is imperative if you're going to go out into the woods and look for Bigfoot. People automatically want to go to causality. Bigfoot caused that. But it could just be a coincidence or it could be a correlation. So a correlation or a coincidence is defined by Merriam's dictionary as the act or condition of coinciding, as well as the occurrence of events that happen at the same time by accident, but seem to have some connection. There seems to be a connection or a relationship between two things, but in reality, they just randomly occurred together. The most common example of this, I think, it seems like baseball players are very superstitious, and they wear a certain pair of shorts and they pitch a no-hitter or they win a game. Well, then they keep wearing those shorts, and for a while they keep winning games. So they think there's a relationship between the underwear that they wear and whether they win games or not. But it's just a totally random, unconnected thing. I am gonna. I failed to remind us in the beginning. If you want a post that will grab my eye, put it in caps. Planet 412. I'm reading yours because I know a little bit about you and your experience. I hope you don't mind me putting it up. But obviously, Doc, if you have an event like I did when I was 14, there were 4 of us. So that's not something that is taken into consideration. Well, that's one of the things that would help us tease out and rule out just a coincidence. You know, when multiple people see it, it's less likely to be a coincidence. And maybe Eric can remember the diagnostic name for this. There is a type of delusion, however, that is shared by multiple people where they come to believe certain things. And it can happen in small groups or large groups, but a delusion being a false idea that is maintained in the face of contradictory information. And I'm not Planet 412, I am in no way suggesting that this is an explanation for your event. I rewatched that event. For those of you who don't know, Planet 412, he had a dogman encounter that is very harrowing, and I would encourage you to look it up. I'm sure it's posted on his page on 412, and he's been interviewed by a variety of people about this. And it is one of the most incredible encounters that I have ever heard. And it was definitely a life-threatening encounter. So in your case, I don't think you four guys had a simultaneous delusion. I think you're falling up there towards causality rather than even correlation based on your story, if that makes any sense to you. Hello, ASPA 60. Hello, John Ayers. I don't know if I caught you. Yeah, Matt Emmett is on Planet 412, and I encourage you all to check out one of his interviews about this event because it is incredible and a harrowing kind of experience for sure. Moving on to correlation. Correlation is defined by Webster's as a relationship existing between phenomena or things, or between mathematical or statistical variables which tend to vary, be associated, or occur together in a way that's not expected on the basis of chance alone. So this isn't just an accident. There's a relationship going on here. Charlotte J., thank you for that. It's a full, I'm not good with French. Full ado is the kind of group, the group delusion that it can occur. And that's actually in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Good work, Charlotte J. I appreciate that very much. So in a correlation, there is a connection. There is a relationship between these two events. The example I like to use here, mostly because it took me a while to realize this, but I thought, well, the professor asked us, is there a causal relationship between rising temperatures, or is it a correlational relationship between rising temperatures? And I'm sitting there thinking, well, as temperatures increase, ice cream begins to melt. So there must be a causal relationship between ice cream melting and temperatures rising. Well, it took me a while to see the light, but the fact of the nature is rising temperatures do not cause ice cream to melt. For a causal relationship, you have to have a 100% correlation so that every time one variable changes, the variable that it influences changes in either the same or the opposite direction. So I thought, surely there's a causal relationship. In fact, though, if you think about it, if the ice cream is frozen at minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, as that temperature warms up, it rises from minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit. You know what? It's still frozen. So there is not a causal relationship between rising temperatures and ice cream melting, when it's out of our freezer, of course, until you get above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. I believe that's 0 degrees Celsius. Then as the temperature goes up, the ice cream melts. but before that, there's no melting going on. So it's a co-relationship. The way to understand correlation is it's a co-relationship. The two variables are related to each other. Got another question, another good one. John, would any of those delusions ever show in signs of PTSD? It would be where, like, if all four people had a traumatizing experience and they all experienced it at the same time, yes, it's possible if they developed what I would call a severe PTSD, that they could, as a group, develop that delusion. But it would have to be severe PTSD, and that delusion, Charlotte J, what was it again? Oh, I wanted to take another stab at the French. But it could potentially, because folks who get severe PTSD can become delusional, they can hallucinate, but that's generally a pretty extreme case. Hope that answers your question. The big C, causality. And this is what we're about in Bigfoot. We're trying to prove Bigfoot exists. So the kind of the current norm in the field is we go out and we look for Bigfoot sign. We look for footprints. We listen for whoops or howls or grunts, any kind of vocalization that Bigfoot might put out. And, tree knocks. So keeping in mind that causality means 100% relationship, I would ask you to ask yourself, is there a causal relationship between tree knocks and Bigfoot? Because we're using tree knocks as evidence that Bigfoot exists. Keep in mind, that's why we're focused on it. We hear a tree knock, we rule out other things that could be creating that sound, and if nothing else explains it, then we say Bigfoot. Well, do tree knocks are tree knocks caused by Bigfoot? Or if we do a tree knock and we get a tree knock back, did our knock cause Bigfoot to make a knock back? Well, one of the things we already know from experiential research is there's not a causal relationship between tree knocks and Bigfoot. Even after we eliminate all the other possible variables, it's not a causal relationship. Why is that? I'm going to pull up this question because it's good in timeliness. Does it always have to be 100%? Any more allowed? Well, so for causality, you need 100% relationship. If you want to rely on experiential variables to prove the existence of Bigfoot. I guess theoretically, there could be greater than 100% relationship in that sometimes Bigfoots initiate the knocks themselves. But we already know from, Legacy, nicely trained dogs. Hey, how are you, my friend? Good question. I'm glad you're here. Thank you very much. So the reason we know that tree knocks are not a causal relationship, that there's not a causal relationship between us making a tree knock and a tree knock coming back to us, is because every time we make a knock, do we get a knock back? No, we don't. Sometimes we get knocks back, sometimes we don't. Simply given the fact that we don't get a knock for knock return, that eliminates it being 100% statistical relationship, because there are frequent times where you make a knock and a Bigfoot doesn't knock back. They may then respond to a clack, a stone clack. They may respond to some other things, but they also don't respond 100% to those other things. So we already know tree knocks don't cause Bigfoot to knock back 100%. And therefore, this is why in getting science to accept Bigfoot's existence, when we cite things like footprints or tree knocks, we get kind of scoffed at because there's not 100% relationship between those kinds of evidence and Bigfoot. Let's go back to my story of what I call the landslide story. It was either a landslide or a bluff charge, in my opinion. But did Bigfoot cause that next morning when Jason Mixon, thank you, Jason Mixon went up there and cast that print? He found that print there. Now, given the shape and size and the identifying characteristics, I saw that print, and it was 18 inches long and 8 or 9 inches wide, and you could see every bone in the foot. You could see the mid-tarsal break on the cast, and you could see the dermal ridges on the cast. So it met most, the criteria that we have for a genuine Bigfoot print. But can we say, if it wasn't that good of a print, can we say, based on the experience that we had, that we know that Bigfoot caused that print that night? We can say there's a correlation there, but we can't necessarily say Bigfoot caused it, because we didn't see Bigfoot cause it. And so we're deducing. I think it's a reasonable deduction that Bigfoot caused it. But in terms of being able to say with scientific certainty that Bigfoot caused it, we can't. What would be a causal relationship? Every time we know a Bigfoot's in the area, we find a footprint. Again, if you've been out in the woods, you know that Bigfoots can be in the area and you can go and never, ever find a footprint. So there's not 100% relationship. And this is why I wrote my book, and this is why I'm sitting here talking to you. Experiential research like we do is absolutely necessary, and it's important. But those kind of experiences will not be accepted by science as proof that Bigfoot exists, because there aren't those 100% relationships out there. There just aren't. So the only other way to prove a causal relationship is to do experimentation. And again, in the back half of my book, if you're a really dedicated reader, I talk about experimental design and statistics, because that's the best thing. It's not a perfect thing, but it's the best thing that I know of and most people can point to prove a causal relationship, using a specific experimental design and then statistically analyzing it. In your statistical analysis, the statistics will tell you the probability of random error, and your your experimental design then is used to minimize what's called systematic error. Systematic error being errors that you would expect to influence your experiment. And so you control for those through your experimental design. At this point, I thought legacy had another margin of error. I'm not sure what you mean by margin of error. Just a plug for Legacy Nicely. She is an awesome dog trainer, and we got into a debate over the behavioral sciences as they relate to dog training. And we have become very good friends. We chat pretty regularly. And at this point, she probably knows statistics better than I. I'm not sure, though, what you're asking about when you say margin of error. So I'm going to ask you to clarify that and come back to you. But if you need a good dog trainer, check out Legacy Nicely Trained Dogs. She really knows her stuff. She's trained police canines and the whole 9 yards, and now works with clients with, quote, regular dogs, as it were. John brings up a good question. Would knocks work best? I can't disprove you, John, but I'm going to challenge that a little bit. In my own experience, sometimes there are going to be times where a subtle stone clack might work better than a full-blown wood knock. Other times the full-blown wood knock works. Sometimes neither of those kind of work, and they're responding to vocalizations. And certainly a very interesting, study would do a regional study on that, where using a counterbalance design, you start with a wood knock, wait for a response, record whether you got one or not, then do a stone clack, wait for a response, record it whether you got it or not, then do a whoop, wait for a response or not. Then, to eliminate order effects or delayed responses, you go to your next spot, but instead of making that wood knock first, you make your stone clack first. Then your vocalization, then the wood knock. You go to your next spot, you do the vocalization first, then the tree knock, then the stone clack. Then your next spot, you're back to the same order: wood knock, stone clack, clack, whoop, or call. So in that way, that's an example of systematic error that I was referring to earlier. If you make a wood knock and you don't wait long enough, it may be a delayed response. So you got to put some time in between the wood knock and the stone clack. But if you make a wood knock and you allow time, and then you do a stone clack, and you immediately get a stone clack back, then you got to wait. Then you move on to the whoop. And that's called counterbalancing, because you're alternating the order of your intervention, if you will, the tree knock, the stone clack, and the whoop. And you're trying to determine which of these are more likely to provoke a response from Bigfoot. And I'd be willing, it's just a hypothesis on my part. My squatching has been in the southeastern United States. But I bet you there may be some regional variants. I know even within the southeastern United States, there are variations to that. going to one location in Georgia, they seem to like wood knocks. Going to another region in Tennessee, wood knocks just didn't seem to work, but stone clacks did. So I'm suspicious there may be some regional variations, but certainly wood knock's a good place to start. And of course, those of us who are familiar with the Bigfoot field, you're also familiar with the debate as to whether it's even a either they're using wood or not. Some people believe that they're using their lips, their teeth, using their hands to provide like a megaphone effect. Jeff Meldrum points out that great apes have a vestige bellow in their body, and they use that vestige bellow to create some of their sounds. So there are a lot of variables to rule out. John, what do you say? Stone clack back. I say that. Yeah. Okay. Moving on. Wow. Okay. I hate to do it this fast because this is very important. I gave those examples. Sightings. BFRO reporting system. They've got a 3-tier classification system. Class A, B, and C. Given, just an important note, a given witness might be very credible, but could have honestly misinterpreted something that was seen, found, or heard. Thus, for the most part, the circumstances of the incident determine the potential for misinterpretation and therefore the classification of the report. Class A reports involve clear sightings. The clear needs to be emphasized here, guy. In circumstances where misinterpretation of the animals can be ruled out with greater confidence. For example, there are several footprint cases that are very well documented. These are considered Class A reports because misidentification of common animals can be confidently ruled out. Thus, the potential for misinterpretation is very low. And why can it be ruled out? Number one, the size of the feet, signs of mid-tarsal break, dermal ridges. And if you ever have to take a footprint in snow, guys, you need some hairspray. And hairspray the print before you put any casting material down there. And you won't melt the snow. But the other thing to look for in big footprints, if you see more than one, is they're kind of central in their stride. They don't alternate from side to side, obviously. They're not quite a straight line, but they're in a little bit of a straight line compared to human footprints and other animal footprints, where there's clearly a right side or a left side. In serial or series of big footprints, you can still tell right from left, obviously, but they're going to be pretty close together, unlike in human and other prints where there's a great amount of left to right space. Class B, incidents where a possible Sasquatch was observed at a great distance or in poor lighting conditions, and incidents in any other circumstance that did not afford a clear view of the subject are considered Class B reports. For example, credible reports where nothing was seen, but distinct characteristics of sounds of Sasquatches were heard are always considered Class B reports and never Class A, even in most cases, compelling sound only cases. This is because the lack of a visual element raises a much greater potential for misidentification of sounds. And, I think in my title, I talked about objectivity. Again, these are guidelines and rules or lessons to think about as you're trying to evaluate whether you've got Bigfoot sign, a Class A, a Class B, or a Class C encounter. We're not going to get perfect objectivity, but anything we can do to eliminate other variables or bring in variables that are consistent with our target species are going to increase the likelihood of a correct identification and classification. Use magic shell ice cream syrup in the snow. It will make the chocolate cast. Turns hard when it's cold. Are you serious, John? I have never heard that. I'm not sure. You make so many jokes, buddy. I'm not sure if you're making a joke or you're being factual there. I would love to hear whether that's just a joke or factual. It's certainly interesting. So I was in the woods standing shoulder to shoulder with another experienced Bigfooter. And to make a long story short, he saw a dark figure that he felt was undoubtedly a Bigfoot cross the street. I didn't see it. I was visually oriented in a completely different direction than he was, even though we were standing shoulder to shoulder. Okay, so John, that was a joke, or not? Or Ristel's saying he did that as a kid, or she. I'm not sure what gender you are. We were standing shoulder to shoulder, looking off in different directions. He saw a dark shape go across the road. I'm sorry, I don't actually remember whether I don't think anyone else saw it. There were 2 or 3 others in our group and they were looking elsewhere. Now, is that a Class A or is that a Class B sighting? It's a tough one because he clearly saw that dark shape. We couldn't find any footprints though. So what are the chances of misidentification? You know, this was before Dogman became all the rage. And now, you see that kind of shape crossing the road momentarily. I think we'd have to rule out Dogman. In the depth of the night, they may have or appear to have similar profiles. Although Matt can tell us more about that, I'm sure, than I can imagine. Or was it a Class B? The Sasquatch was observed in poor lighting conditions, and the incidents or incidents in any other circumstance that did not afford a clear view is considered a Class B. Something to think about. And then Class C. Oh, let's see, Class B. Class B reports are not considered less credible or less important than Class A reports. Both types are deemed credible enough by the BFRO to show to the public. For example, one of the best documented reports ever received by the BFRO is a Class B report from Trinity, California. It involved a very credible witness who backpacked into a remote area that has a history of Sasquatch-related incidences. He described various occurrences around his camp that night that were strongly suspected to be Sasquatch-related. The report is still considered Class B, though, because there were no clear visual observations to confirm what was heard outside the tent. So today I was surfing the internet, and you see this question come up often. Have you seen a Bigfoot? Have you actually seen a Bigfoot? And on the surface, that seems like a simple question. But when you think about these different these different variations, there are different degrees of seeing a Bigfoot. Is it a Class A sighting? Is it a Class B sighting? So, people always respond, yeah, I saw it, or no, I didn't, but the people who are responding, yes, I've seen one, they need to think about, was that a Class A or a Class B sighting? Because there are different degrees of seeing a Bigfoot. Class C, the most secondhand reports or any third-hand reports or stories with untraceable sources are considered Class C. Basically, they're just telling a story. Those reports are kept in the BFRO archives, but are rarely listed publicly in this database. The exceptions are of published or locally documented instances before 1958, before the word Bigfoot entered the American vocabulary, and sightings mentioned in a non-tabloid newspaper and magazine. So, again, this isn't the Holy Grail, but it's one set of guidelines. As far as I know, the only structured set of guidelines out there for classifying Bigfoot sightings. And even if you don't care whether it was a Class A or a Class B sighting, I find just reading through these criteria get me thinking about things and help my reasoning as I'm trying to sort through the evidence. So I think it's a pretty good deal. Plug for my boss, Doug Hychek. He's got a set of guidelines that are for videos. And if you get so many red flags, I think there are like 20 criteria. And if you get so many red flags, it's a faked video. If you have below so many red flags, it's a genuine video. And I'm sure Doug would be happy to share that with you all. At some point, I'm hoping to get his permission to make that one of my episodes to discuss it, because it's very fascinating. And he reports very good validity and reliability with his criteria. Maybe setting up similar criteria. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I am so sick of blob squatches. It's kind of turned me off to even looking at pictures. So many people are putting up blob squatches where, even after they circle the photograph where they see the Bigfoot, many people can't see it. And of course, in our last episode, we talked about pareidolia, where, if you got a picture, you can see things that aren't there because of the shadows and the surrounding environment. So, Dr. John, buying that book of yours for Christmas. Well, thank you. That's nice. Yeah, I'll do whatever I can to sign it. Who's saying they're buying it? Yeah, ASPA 60. Yeah, especially for you, ASPA 60, Mr. and Mrs. ASPA 60. I don't know if it's both you guys watching or not, but I'd be happy to like get one for you, sign it, and then get it shipped out to you for sure. Any questions? I make the point down here, just keep in mind that these reports by BFRO are taken and written down. Words are symbols. They're not the actual experience. And I think that's nicely an important thing to think about. We're still dealing with symbols. It's not the actual consensus reality itself. So this is the summary, which I'll go through real quick, from the entire presentation, which usually Only takes me an hour and a half when I present it live. One of the big gaps is between science and the experiential researchers. Another big gap is between the flesh and blood camp and the woo camp. I believe that we've got to be open to it all. These dichotomies have created hard feelings and big gaps within the community. But we need both types of research. We need the phenomenological evidence, because without it, we wouldn't know where to begin the scientific experimentation. So the experiential evidence is the foundation upon which we've got to build the scientific structure or framework. And in this last slide, I go back to what you'll find on the BFRO website, and I'm just gonna, for the purposes of time, go to the quotes. Well, no, I'm not. The use of subjective evaluation is what separates the legal perspective of witness testimony from the scientific perspective. Witness reports are considered anecdotal evidence, as are experiential Bigfoot expeditions, I will note, mainly because they are not testable. Yet many scientists are wise enough to understand that anecdotal evidence always preceded and leads to the collection of scientific evidence. Again, yet many scientists are wise enough to understand that anecdotal evidence always preceded and leads to the collection of scientific evidence. In the history of science, scientific evidence has never been collected or even pursued until there has been enough anecdotal or indirect evidence at hand to merit an effort to collect testable evidence. Thus, without the collection and evaluation of anecdotal evidence or indirect evidence, there would be no scientific discoveries at all. This is the intrinsic relationship between the two types of evidence. Sighting reports by themselves are not scientific evidence. Even a Class A sighting is not scientific evidence, but they lead us to the scientific evidence. And I think that's one of the hardest lessons and pills to swallow in the community, is that if you had a Bigfoot sighting, Class A, clear, no doubt about it, it's Bigfoot, that should be evidence to the scientific community. Unfortunately, it's not. We've got to do experimentation out in the field if we're going to be able to prove it to the scientific community. I think we're going to wrap it up at that point. I'm not sure what's on tap for next week, to be honest with y'all. I've got a few things kicking around in my head, thinking about going to evidence and looking at the legal evidence and building a bridge from it into Bigfoot evidence. Qualitative versus quantitative evidence, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. So I want to thank you all for attending. Subscribe if you haven't, like, spread the word, share. I appreciate it. I appreciate you all very much. And as is my habit, I'm going to ask you to keep an open mind, keep your boots on the ground, and your heart with your higher power. Good night.
I see you running out of reason. Don't try to blame it on the seasons. Why you wanna walk away? When we began, swear we had something that would last.
has the feeling best. Falling in was easy, how do I make it stay? I'll never let go of you, tried and true. Tried and true. Was I a fool? I know sometimes I may wonder, but I would never leave asunder a thing as good as what we have. Is it a rule? What's good is worth the fighting. There ain't no denying that you and I were made to last. Falling in was easy, how can we make it stay? I'll never let go of you, tried and true. Tried and true. I will never let go of you. Tried and true. I will never let go of you. Tried and true. Have you had a change of heart? Can we go back to the start? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true.
You by my side. If you're in, meet me here tonight. Be brave and come alive.